Alright, so Brandon Moreno versus Steve Erceg just wrapped up, and Moreno got the win via unanimous decision. All three judges scored it 49-46 for Brandon Moreno. They gave him round 1, 2, 4, and 5, with Erceg only gaining the third round on the scorecards. But right after the decision, the MMA world lit up. Everywhere I looked, X, Reddit, YouTube, all those comments, people were screaming robbery. And listen, I get the frustration. It was a super competitive fight. And yeah, it wasn't easy to score. But personally, I had Moreno winning the first 2 rounds, definitely the 4th, and I'd say the 5th is very debatable. That said, here's where the conversation gets real. Under the rules, the unified rules, damage is the #1 criteria, and that's where a lot of people are giving him the edge to Steve Erceg. If you rewatch round 3, 4, and even 5, you could argue that Erceg was landing the cleaner, harder shots, especially in round 4. Some of those counters were sharp, and he clearly had an impact. So yeah, Moreno was the one that was pressing forward and putting on volume, but if we're being real about what won the round, it wasn't the forward pressure, it's not the volume, it was the effective damage. And that's where I think the backlash does make sense. You could argue that Erceg did more in those later rounds than actually hurt Moreno. So here's the thing, I watched the fight for a second time, and now I was thinking about let's go round by round, and I'm gonna score it and we'll see if it really is a robbery. So I guess we'll start with the first round, and for me, this was a pretty clear 10-9 for Moreno. Right out of the gate, Moreno came out looking sharp. He was pushing the pace, taking the center of the octagon, and just setting the tempo. You can see right away that he was the one trying to establish control, and Erceg was more on the back foot trying to figure things out. Now, the biggest difference in this round came from how clean Moreno was landing, especially with the right hand. He was tagging Erceg repeatedly, straight rights down the pipe, a couple overhand mix-ins, and they were landing flush. He wasn't just touching him, he was landing him with impact. And let's not forget, he actually stunned Erceg in this round too. There was a moment where Erceg got caught clean, and you can see it. It was definitely not a knockdown or anything wild, but it definitely wobbled him a bit and forced them to reset. That's a big deal when you're scoring a round, because it shows who's really doing damage here. And that's where the judges are looking for. Now moving into round 2, this one was a lot more tighter. This is where things really started to heat up, and both guys had their moments. Steve Erceg came out with a little bit more urgency. You could see that he wanted to make some adjustments. He opened up with a nice head kick early, just to let Moreno know that he wasn't going to be backing up all night. And credit for him, man. He started finding his range a bit better in this round, and he was starting to sneak in some right hands and even well-timed knees that caught Moreno clean. But Moreno didn't go anywhere. He stayed composed, kept that forward pressure going, and just kept throwing heat with that overhand right. That punch was there for him all night, and he kept finding a home for it in round 2. On top of that, he started chopping away at Erceg's lead leg and those calf kicks, and they weren't just touching those kicks either. You could see Erceg reacting to them. And that's really where Moreno started to separate himself, the variety in his attacks. While Erceg was landing nice combinations, Moreno was the one that was mixing it up better. He had headshots, leg kicks, forward pressure, and he was just doing more damage with those shots, not just throwing them for sake of activity. Now look, if someone told me that they gave the round to Erceg, I wouldn't argue too hard. It was close, but if we're sticking with some of that scoring criteria, effective striking, and damage being the king, Moreno had the bigger, more impactful moments. That overhand kept landing, and that lead leg kick added a layer that might have swung the round for him. So overall, I gave round 2 to Moreno, but it was a razor thin. Definitely not as clear as the first, but when you stack the clean right hand with that lead leg kick and his pressure, I can see why all 3 judges leaned his way again. Now, heading into round 3, this is where the tide starts to shift a bit. You can feel the momentum balancing out after Moreno had taken the first 2, and this round was definitely tighter. Erceg made some nice adjustments. He started using his footwork and his head movement a lot more effectively. He wasn't just standing in front of Moreno anymore. He was circling around, slipping, making Moreno miss, and landing precise counters. That jab was working, and he mixed in clean step-in knees that got through right up the middle. This round wasn't as a high pace as the first 2. Both guys seemed to be conserving a little bit more energy, but Erceg was landing the cleaner shots overall. He didn't throw in volume, but when he did let his hands go, he made it count. You can see that he was finding his rhythm, he kept it up technically, and picking his spots. Now Moreno didn't disappear, he was still pressuring forward, still trying to land big overhand rights and digging to the body with the jab, but he started missing more often in this round. Erceg's movement was giving him trouble, and that took away some of Moreno's usual success with pressure. So yeah, I showed round 3 for Steve Erceg. He showed great composure, tightened up defensively, and landed the sharper shots. Really solid adjustments for him in the middle of this fight. Alright, now moving into round 4. This one was tight, but in my opinion, another round for Brandon Moreno. Early on, Moreno came out sharp again. He was using that jab really well to keep Erceg at bay and kind of reset the tempo. He started doubling up on the left hook too, which was slick. You could tell that he was really trying to mix up the rhythm and give Erceg different looks, and it worked. Erceg was having a harder time finding openings in this round. There was a little moment where Erceg tried to slow things down with a teep kick and landed it, but Brandon answered right back with that signature overhand, and it landed clean. He wasn't just touching Erceg, he was landing the heavier shots in this round, even when the exchanges were short. Moreno's punches looked like they were carrying more weight. Now overall, the round didn't have that wild back and forth moment we saw earlier, but both guys were a bit more tactical. All 3 judges gave round 4 to Moreno, and I think that's fair. He controlled the pace, landed the more impactful shots, and closed strong with that takedown. So yeah, even though it was a close round, I've got to give it to Moreno. He just showed that he had that composure and made smart adjustments when it mattered. Alright, so let's close this thing out with round 5, and this was a critical round, no doubt about it. Both guys came in knowing that it could be close on the scorecard, so there was a lot on the line here. Moreno still looked composed and steady. He kept applying that same forward pressure we've seen all fight, staying busy and continue to mix up his targets. He wasn't throwing in wild bursts, but his shot selection was smart, focused on landing meaningful strikes, especially that right hand that's been so effective throughout the fight. That said, Erceg had his moments too. He stayed mobile, stayed technical, and looked to land sharp counters when Moreno pressed in. His jab was still a factor, and defensively, he was managing distance pretty well. The difference is his volume dipped a bit compared to the earlier rounds. He seemed more reactive than proactive, which may have cost him the round in the judges' eyes. So when you weighed it all out, Moreno's forward pressure, his activity, and the impact of his strikes, he likely edged that final round. It wasn't a dominant frame by any means, but it was enough to tip things his way, especially in a close fight. And overall, it was a solid win for Brandon Moreno. And in my opinion, the judges scored this fight correct. It was a great win for Brandon Moreno. This wasn't one of those fights where he relied on his usual jab heavy methodical approach. He leaned on his power punching, and that's what really made the difference throughout this matchup. The overhand right was the star of the show. He kept fighting it all night, whether it was off a step in or a right after slipping a jab, just that classic Moreno timing. It was landing clean, and you can tell it made Erceg respect his power from early on. He also did a great job mixing in those lead leg kicks, especially in the early rounds, which helped slow Erceg's movement down and kept him from getting too comfortable at range. And look, full credit to Steve Erceg too, man. He made this competitive. This was a high-level flyweight fight. He had great moments with his footwork, his jab, and his head movement, especially in the third round. But Moreno's experience and composure just kept him a step ahead when it mattered the most. This was one of those fights where Brandon didn't need to be flashy. He just stayed solid, landed with power, managed the pace, and did enough to earn 49-46 on all 3 cards. And honestly, that's what you want from a guy who's still trying to prove that he belongs back in title talk. He showed grit, high fight IQ, and the ability to make in-fights adjustments. So yeah, not the cleanest or flashiest win. It was a well-earned one, and remember that Brandon Moreno is still right there among the elite at 125. So this fight, in my opinion, was not a robbery, but just a close fight.